The Jager and Ducain Mysteries. Chapter 1. A Scene of Tragedy. "Okay, Detective Ducain, what have you got for me?" inquired Detective Anthony Jager, in a strained tone, like a man who's barely slept for a couple of days, as he and his female partner were escorted into the crime scene under the yellow police tape, guarded by two uniformed cops, trying, with great frustration, to keep the carrion of Harrow nightly news at bay. Outside of the local pawnbrokers, with a sign above the door in white letters on a blue background, which looked dull grey and black in the absence of sunlight. It was a moonless and starless night. The sign read, "Last Hope Pawnbrokers. Trade in your old trash for cold hard cash." "It looks like another murder-suicide, I'm afraid," explained the young detective, pinching her nose from the repulsive odor of the prematurely deceased. "That's the third one in 2 months, Jager remarked, rubbing the bridge of his nose at the scene. "The two here," Ducain continued, as she pointed to the dead customers, lying in front of the counter in fresh body bags, "were a married couple, Mr. and Mrs. Beck." She handed him the crime scene photos. "Both took 2 shots. Mr. Stan Beck got a round in the left eye and one through his heart. Mrs. Selma Beck got one in the stomach and the temple. Then," she walked behind the counter to a third body. "This man, the owner, Mr. Simon Turner, turned his .45 caliber handgun on himself," said the young detective as she briefed her partner on Harrow's latest tragedy. Detective Jenny Ducain was a pretty and highly intelligent young woman. She was taller than average, around 6 foot, built more like a fitness model than a cop, sun-kissed skin and sandy blonde hair tied up in a professional ponytail, smartly dressed in a light grey suit, white silk blouse underneath, eager to learn, eager to please. She and her stoic-looking associate had been partnered up for about 6 months now. As much as Jager knew Ducain was capable and showed a promising potential, he also knew she had a hell of a lot to learn. This was a job where hesitation or the simplest of mistakes could get you suspended, jailed, or even killed. That's under normal circumstances. Whatever had been going on in Harrow for the last few years was far from normal. Jager and Ducain walked around the pawnshop floor. It was a complete shambles. Stains of dried blood and bits of brain painted the once pristine white and gold floral wallpaper. Add to that the chunks of who knows what viscera scattered along the floor, making the entire place look like a slasher film set. Not to mention that distinct squelching sound of tacky blood that had pooled along the antique tiles of the pawnshop floor, and had settled in the grooves and cracks. They scanned every possible detail for any evidence that could lead them to anything that would shed light on this seemingly random outburst of violence. "Why do I get all the whack jobs?" Jager thought to himself as he examined the scene. To prepare himself for another extended, stressful night, he took out a cigarette from his jacket pocket without really thinking about it, placing it between his lips, but stopped short of lighting it. He knew better than to light a smoke in a crime scene, no matter how badly he might have needed it. "Does the owner have any history of drug or alcohol abuse, mental illness, or depression?" he inquired while putting the intact smoke back into its pack. "A grudge against the couple?" "No, quite sane and a saint by all accounts. Regular churchgoer and fundraiser for numerous charities," said Ducain while examining her notes. "From what we were told, he had no reason to harm anyone." "What is it with this town and everyone just flipping out like this?" Jager snapped. His bloodshot eyes widened, snarling slightly as he spoke. "My theory is it's drugs. Some new shit on the market. Have you sent his blood off to the science guys?" "Blood samples have been sent off to the lab team just before we got here. We won't know if he had anything in his system for a few days. One thing I love about this job is the fucking waiting around for a computer to tell me the stuff I already know," he said, with an air of disdain. Something sinister had cast its shadow over the town of Harrow, a plague of strangeness and an infectious madness, whose origins no cop or scientist could find. Plenty of theories in the air, but no solid or rational reasons. Detective Anthony Jager, a tall, middle-aged man with greying hair and steel-grey eyes, was on a crusade to find out why these horrible things were happening and put a stop to it. After 20 years on the force, he had not seen anything so brutal or so random as the series of murder-suicides he had been looking into for the past couple of years. It was as if the whole country had gone mad, just looking for a fight with sanity. Looking through the collection of evidence, Jager found an old leather-bound journal, sealed in a bag marked "Leather Journal," that appeared to have belonged to the pawnshop owner. He snapped on a pair of latex gloves, plucked it out with the greatest of care, then proceeded to flip through and study its contents, seeing what secrets it might reveal within its pages. At the other end of the shop, Detective Ducain examined and admired a piece of evidence marked "Antique Ring," silver, embedded with deep blue sapphires, defaced with smudges of dried blood from the dead owner. It was old, but well maintained. Not a scratch or mark on it, except for the blood stain, of course. Jenny was entranced. She admired it because she felt it looked like something a film star or model would wear. Hey, look at what I can afford sort of accessory. The deceased pawnbroker appeared to have kept good notes, always using the full names of the persons he was meeting, or the places he was going, using a 24-hour clock when noting the time of an appointment. The last entry, however, only had the time and location, no name at all, sparking an interest in the veteran detective's curiosity. "Hey, Ducain, if you're finished daydreaming, take a look at he called over. Detective Ducain responded with a swift turn of her head, placed her hands in her pockets, and walked over to Detective Jager. "What do you make of this?" he asked, handing her the journal. She flipped through the book in a similar studious manner to Jager, her green eyes scanning from side to side. After a moment she said, "I wish my diary was this organized. This last entry has no name attached to it. Just a location, the date and time," pointing out what Jager had already discovered. "Exactly," replied Jager. "No name. Do you think it could be a girlfriend, or maybe he had a wife, and the person here was—" "His other woman?" Detective Ducain interrupted. "Correct. You read my mind, kid." He smiled slightly, and then coughed and turned away. "How many times have I told you, stop calling me kid? I've been a cop for 5 years, and the top of my class back at the academy. I'm the youngest detective in this town's history." The statement had an air of arrogance to it. Jager didn't want to put her down, but he needed to give her a reality check. "That's why I call you kid, 'cause you keep acting like one," he rebuked firmly. "You're a good cop, Ducain, but you still have a lot to learn about being a detective. Just because you're young doesn't make you good. Hard work and dedication makes you good. Being young just gives you more energy and enthusiasm to get things done." The pair made one last sweep of the crime scene before the CSI would arrive to take the bodies away. Jager took a closer look at the bodies. There was nothing unusual about the couple, except they were dead. But when Jager looked at the body of Simon Turner, something caught him off guard. The man's eyes appeared to have been bleeding at the time of his death, though it was hard to tell with all the blood around him. Luckily, if you can call this luck, the man had placed the gun in his mouth when he had killed himself, so all the damage was at the back of his head. Jager told one of the crime scene investigators to mention this to the coroner when he arrived, then headed to the address in the pawnbroker's journal. The detectives wrapped things up as quickly as they could. As far as they were concerned, It was more or less an open and shut case. But with what they found, Jager felt a hunch that the address in the journal was worth checking out all the same. Might be something, might be nothing. Uneasy did not quite explain how Jager was feeling. It's like that deep instinct that you can't explain, but you know you shouldn't ignore. As he drove up to his partner's building, she was about to unbuckle her seatbelt, when Jager asked Ducain, out of the blue, "Why did you become a cop?" She was slightly taken aback at the question, not sure how to respond. "Because I want to serve my country?" He scoffed abruptly. "You think that's what I want to hear? That's what we all say. So tell me, why a cop, and not off kicking ass in an MMA cage around LA or New York or Vegas?" "I guess it's because all my family were cops, so it was kind of a family tradition." "Was your father a cop?" "Nah. I'm afraid my dad was just a steel worker after he served in Nam. So trust me, I know about pride and family pressure. Listen, do this for yourself, not for anybody else. I need people who come into this job and have their hearts and minds fully in the game. If not, Miss Ducain, I think you know what you need to do." And with that, she got out of the car and made her way to her apartment. Jager was about to drive off when he thought he saw something in the seat next to him. When he turned around, however, he discovered he was the only person in the vehicle. He put it down to the fact that it was now 3:34 a.m. and needed to be off back to his own apartment to get some much-needed sleep. It was an eventful night, so the Valium could take the night off. The next morning, Detectives Jager and Ducain walked down the cold, sterile hallway to the coroner's office and morgue. "This place gives me the creeps," Ducain told Jager as they travelled down the long corridor. Jager laughed. "Wait until you meet the weirdo that runs it. He'll make your skin crawl off your bones. It's not the dead you need to worry about here." The two detectives pushed open the heavy metal doors to the morgue and were about to walk in. The smell was almost indescribable. A cross between cleaning chemicals and death hung in the room. Detective Jager took a small round tin, twisted the lid off, and rubbed his fingers across the waxy-looking contents, and appeared to rub it across his upper lip, right under his nose. Then he handed the tin to Ducain. "Trust me, this will help with the smell." Ducain took the small round tin, glanced at it, and took a moment to read the label. "Vapor rub," and copied Jager's actions. Out of nowhere, a hollow voice called out, "I wouldn't do that, young lady." Jager called to the voice deep within the morgue. "Oh, damn it, I almost got her." "What's going on here?" asked Ducain. "Mr. Jager is trying to haze you, my dear. That stuff he told you to put on your lip would open your nasal passages and make the smell of decomposition 10 times worse than it already would normally be." "You jerk!" Ducain yelled as she punched Jager's upper arm, causing her male counterpart to rub the spot that would no doubt leave a strong bruise later. The voice called to them both. "I presume you've come here for more than pulling that prank on the fresh meat?" Slowly, a shadow loomed across the inside of the morgue, growing larger as its supposed weirdo owner approached. Ducain found herself holding her breath and let it out carefully. When she saw the coroner, her eyes widened and her mouth dropped open a little. This man, standing 6'3" and with a jaw that could cut glass, was the best-looking coroner Detective Ducain had ever seen. "Well, come in if you're coming in," he said with a bright, welcoming smile. The two detectives followed the handsome coroner into the morgue, which was, as you would expect, completely sterile. 3 metal tables stood in the center of the room. The middle one had a covered body on it. On the wall directly opposite of the door they had just entered through was a large desk, above which was a number of closed cabinets. Ducain edged closer to Jager and said, "I thought you said this guy would give me the creeps." "I guess this is the new guy," Jager whispered back to her, though a part of him felt that the guy could half hear them. The coroner stood at the left side of the table, and Jager and Ducain stood opposite him. "Oh, where are my manners? My name is Dr. Thomas Erickson. Tom to my friends," he said, slightly embarrassed while adjusting his coat. "Nice to meet you, Tom. I'm Detective Jenny Ducain," she said, as her eyes filled with hunger and her cheeks turned slightly red. "Detective Erickson, what have you got for us?" Jager asked coldly, not liking the fact that his junior partner was actually swooning. Yes, swooning over Dr. Tommy Boy. Dr. Erickson turned his gaze from the female detective. "Okay, so this is Mr. Turner, and as you no doubt have already figured out, he died of a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head. Now we come to the interesting part. The eyes." The previous coroner concluded that the other murder-suicides with bleeding eyes were a result of extremely high blood pressure, but when I examined the brain, I found that it had been placed under enormous pressure, as though his brain had been squeezed in his skull. "Is that what happened to Mrs. Smith from the Mick Dalton case?" asked Ducain. "No idea," the coroner said flatly. "I've only worked here for a few months. I only examined this one." Jager looked up from the body on the cold steel table. "Has anyone heard from Dr. Khan?" correcting himself sharply. Dr. Erickson looked at Jager with a crooked smile, which faded as soon as he started to speak about his predecessor. "No, not a word. As far as I knew. One day he simply left work and no one has seen him since then. Not even his wife. I guess he's run off with someone. You know what men of his age are like."